The last thing my father said to me was, "Take care of your sister." I never imagined those words would come back to haunt me quite like this. I'm Desiree, and until 3 months ago I thought I knew exactly who I was. The responsible older sister, the one who always did the right thing. Now, I'm not so sure anymore. "You look tired," Nancy said, sliding a steaming latte across my kitchen table. "When was the last time you actually slept?" I shrugged, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. "Sleep's overrated when you're trying to figure out how to make rent next month." "Still nothing from the inheritance?" The word made my stomach clench. "According to Ainsley, Dad left everything to her. Everything." I took a sip of coffee, letting the bitter taste match my mood. "She showed up at my apartment last week in her new Mercedes, talking about her dream wedding like nothing was wrong. That doesn't sound like your father at all." Nancy frowned, leaning forward. "He always seemed so fair." "That's what I thought too." I pulled out my phone, showing her the text Ainsley had sent me yesterday. "Look at this. Don't worry, sis. Once the wedding's paid for, I'll help you out with whatever's left." Nancy's eyes widened. "Whatever's left? She's using your inheritance for her wedding?" "Apparently," I forced a smile. "You should see the venue she's booked. Makes Buckingham Palace look modest." The doorbell rang, making me jump. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Ainsley's perfectly styled blonde hair. "Speak of the devil," I muttered, standing up. Nancy squeezed my hand before I walked to the door. Ainsley burst in like a hurricane in designer clothes. "Des! You'll never believe what happened with the flower arrangements." She stopped short when she saw Nancy. "Oh, hi." "Hi, Ainsley," Nancy replied coolly. "I was just leaving." She gathered her things, giving me a meaningful look. "Call me later." After Nancy left, Ainsley flopped onto my couch. God, she still hates me, doesn't she? Ever since high school. Can you blame her? I remained standing. "You did steal her boyfriend right before prom." Ainsley waved her hand dismissively. "Ancient history. Anyway, about the flowers." "Actually," I interrupted, "can we talk about Dad's will?" Her expression shifted slightly, so quickly I almost missed it. "What about it?" "It just seems odd that he'd leave everything to you." Ainsley stood up, smoothing her dress. "He knew I needed it more. You've always been the responsible one, Des, the successful one." She walked to my window, gesturing at my modest apartment. "I mean, you're doing fine on your own." "Fine?" I laughed incredulously. "I'm about to lose my apartment." "Don't be so dramatic." She turned back to me, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Look, once I'm married to Sergio, I'll help you out. Promise." Something in her tone made me pause. "What do you mean, once you're married?" "Oh, you know." She fumbled with her purse. "Just wedding expenses and all that. Speaking of which, you are coming to the dress fitting tomorrow, right? As my maid of honor?" I stared at her, remembering something Dad had said months ago before he got sick. Something about making sure both his girls were taken care of. "Of course," I heard myself say. "Wouldn't miss it." After Ainsley left, I sat in my quiet apartment, replaying her words in my head. Something wasn't adding up. The way she'd avoided my eyes when talking about the will, that comment about waiting until after the wedding. My phone buzzed with a text from Luke, our older brother. "Hey sis, just heard about Dad's will from Ainsley. You okay?" I typed back, "Actually no. Can you meet me tomorrow? There's something I need to check." His response came quickly. "Noon at Murphy's." "Perfect," I replied, already forming a plan. I walked to my bedroom and opened my closet, pulling out the old shoebox where I kept important documents. At the bottom was Dad's business card for his lawyer, Mitchell Robinson. I'd been avoiding this call, telling myself to trust Ainsley, to keep the peace. But Dad's last words echoed in my head. "Take care of your sister." Maybe it was time to figure out exactly what that meant. I picked up my phone and dialed Mitchell's number, my heart pounding as it rang. "Mitchell Robinson's office," a voice answered. "Hi," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "This is Desiree Franklin. I need to talk to you about my father's will." Murphy's was packed for lunch when I arrived, but I spotted Luke immediately at our usual corner booth. He stood up to hug me, and I noticed the dark circles under his eyes matched mine. "You look terrible," he said, sliding a menu my way. "Thanks. You're not exactly glowing yourself." I sat down, scanning the diner for familiar faces. "Did you tell anyone we were meeting?" Luke shook his head. "Not even Sarah." "What's going on, Des? Your text seemed urgent." Before I could answer, the waitress appeared. After ordering coffee, I pulled out a manila envelope and placed it on the table. "I met with Mitchell this morning," I said quietly. Luke's eyebrows shot up. "Dad's lawyer?" "What did he say?" "That's the thing." I leaned forward. According to him, Dad's original will split everything equally between the three of us. But 2 weeks before he died, someone brought in a new will, signed and notarized. "Let me guess, leaving everything to Ainsley?" I nodded, pulling out some papers. "Look at these bank statements. The day after Dad died, Ainsley transferred almost everything to a new account, then started making massive withdrawals." Luke whistled low. "The wedding? 50,000 for the venue alone." I spread the papers across the table. "But here's what's weird. Look at the signature on the new will." He studied it, frowning. "Something's off." "Mitchell thinks so too. He's having a handwriting expert look at it." The waitress returned with our coffee, and we fell silent until she left. "What are you going to do?" Luke asked, stirring sugar into his cup. My phone buzzed. A text from Nancy. "At the dress fitting. Where are you?" "Ainsley's freaking out." "Shit," I muttered. "I'm supposed to be at the bridal shop." "Go," Luke said, gathering the papers. "I'll look into this more." "But Des?" He caught my arm as I stood. "Be careful. If Ainsley did forge Dad's signature..." "I know." I grabbed my purse. "Just don't tell anyone about this yet." The bridal shop was the explosion of white tulle and nervous energy. Ainsley stood on a pedestal draped in what looked like an entire department store's worth of lace. "You're late," she snapped, while the seamstress pinned her hem. "Traffic," I lied, catching Nancy's eye in the mirror. She gave me a subtle nod. We'd talk later. "Whatever." Ainsley twirled, the dress sparkling under the boutique lights. "What do you think?" "Sergio's mother says it might be a bit much, but I think it's perfect." I watched her preen in the mirror, remembering how we used to play dress-up in Mom's old clothes. Before she died, before Ainsley learned that charm could get her anything she wanted. "It's beautiful," I said, and it was. Just like everything else she was buying with money that wasn't hers. My phone vibrated again. Mitchell. "Expert confirmed. Signature doesn't match. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. "Who keeps texting you?" Ainsley demanded. "Just work stuff." I slipped the phone away. "Hey, remember when Dad used to talk about his retirement plans?" Ainsley stiffened slightly. "What about them?" "He always said he'd split everything equally, that it was important to him we all had the same opportunities." The seamstress excused herself to get more pins, and Nancy suddenly became very interested in a rack of veils. "People change their minds," Ainsley said sharply. "He changed his. End of story." "Did he?" I stepped closer to the pedestal. "Or did someone change it for him?" She turned to face me, her expression hardening. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking why our father would suddenly decide to cut 2 of his children out of his will 2 weeks before he died. Because he knew you didn't need it." She stepped down from the pedestal, her dress rustling. "You've always been the golden child, Des. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect life. For once, he wanted to make things fair." "Fair?" I laughed. "You're spending our inheritance on a wedding that costs more than my annual salary." "Is that what this is about? Money?" She grabbed her phone. "Fine, I'll write you a check right now. Will that shut you up?" "This isn't about money," I said quietly. "This is about what Dad actually wanted, and I'm going to find out the truth." Ainsley's face went pale. "Get out." "Gladly." I turned to leave, then stopped. "Oh, and Ainsley, the dress is beautiful. I hope it's worth it." Outside, Nancy caught up with me. That was intense. What's really going on? I showed her Mitchell's text. Want to help me take down my sister? She linked her arm through mine. Honey, I've been waiting years to hear you say that. Mitchell's office felt colder than I remembered, or maybe it was just the weight of what he was telling me. Forgery is a serious crime, he said, sliding the expert's report across his desk. Are you sure you want to pursue this? She's my sister, I replied, staring at the document. But she stole from me, from Luke, from Dad's memory. So yes, I'm sure. A knock interrupted us. Mitchell's assistant poked her head in. Mr. Mason is here to see you. My heart stopped. Sergio, Ainsley's fiancé, walked in, his usually perfect suit slightly rumpled. I'm sorry, Mitchell started, but we're in the middle of… It's okay, Sergio said, his voice tight. This concerns Ms. Franklin's case. He turned to me. We need to talk. Mitchell excused himself, leaving us alone in his office. Sergio paced by the window, running his hands through his dark hair. How long have you known? He asked finally. About the will? A few days. Why? He pulled out his phone, showing me a series of text messages. Ainsley's been moving money around, large amounts. My mother, she works in banking, noticed some irregularities. What kind of irregularities? Besides the forged will? He laughed bitterly. She's been funneling money into offshore accounts. The wedding? It's just a cover. She's planning to disappear right after. The room spun slightly. What? I confronted her last night. He loosened his tie. She denied everything, of course, but then I found this in her drawer. He handed me a passport, brand new, with Ainsley's photo but a different name. Jesus, I whispered. Does she know you found it? No, but… He was cut off by voices in the hallway. I don't care if he's in a meeting. Ainsley's voice carried through the door. That's my fiancé's car outside. I shoved the passport into my bag just as she burst in. She froze when she saw us together. What's going on? Her eyes darted between us. Just discussing the wedding, Sergio said smoothly. Desiree had some concerns about the venue payment. In our lawyer's office. Her voice rose slightly. Mitchell's an old family friend, I added quickly. He's helping with some paperwork. Ainsley's perfectly made-up face twisted. Paperwork? What kind of paperwork? The kind that proves you forged Dad's will, I snapped, my patience finally breaking. Game's over, Ainsley. You have no proof. Actually, Sergio stepped forward. We do. The colour drained from her face. You're taking her side? I'm taking the side of the truth. He moved closer to me. And the truth is, you've been lying to everyone. Ainsley's hand flew to her throat, a gesture so reminiscent of our mother, it made my chest hurt. Sergio, baby, let me explain. Explain what? His voice was ice. How you plan to take the money and run? Leave me at the altar? She stumbled backward. Who told you? I mean, that's ridiculous. Your mother called me this morning, I said, the lie coming easily. She's worried about you, Ainsley. This has to stop. Mum's dead, she spat. She doesn't get to worry anymore. Neither of you do. She grabbed her purse. The wedding's in 3 days. Try to stop it and you'll regret it. After she stormed out, Sergio slumped against the desk. I can't marry her. No, I agreed. You can't. But if I call it off, she'll know something's wrong. She'll run. I pulled out my phone, texting Luke. Emergency meeting, your place. 1 hour. Then we don't call it off, I told Sergio. We let her think everything's fine. But the wedding, that's where we'll catch her. He looked up, surprised. You have a plan? Getting there. My phone buzzed. Luke confirming the meeting. Want to help take down your fiancé? A slow smile spread across his face. You know what's funny? I actually do. We left Mitchell's office separately. As I waited for my Uber, another text came through from an unknown number. Heard you're causing trouble. Back off. Or those parking tickets won't be your only legal problem. I showed the text to Nancy when I got to Luke's place. She whistled. Looks like big sister's gloves are coming off. Good, I said, watching Sergio pace Luke's living room. Because mine are too. Luke brought out coffee and his laptop. Okay, sis. What's the plan? I looked at our unlikely alliance. my brother, my best friend, and my sister's fiancé, and smiled. We're going to give Ainsley exactly the wedding she deserves. 2 days before the wedding, I sat in Sergio's mother's elegant living room, watching Kira pace with military precision. "Let me get this straight," she said, her banking background evident in her methodical thinking. "My future daughter-in-law forged a will, stole her siblings' inheritance, and plans to abandon my son at the altar?" "That's the short version," Sergio replied, loosening his tie. Kira stopped pacing. "Show me the evidence." I spread everything on her antique coffee table, the forged will, bank statements, the passport Sergio found, and Mitchell's expert analysis. "Mother," Sergio started, but Kira held up a hand. "The wedding is in 48 hours. 200 guests are flying in. The press will be there because of your father's company." She looked at her son. "This needs to be handled delicately." "Delicately?" I leaned forward. "She stole millions." "Exactly." Kira sat down, perfectly poised. "Which is why we need to be smart. A public scandal would hurt everyone, including your family's reputation." My phone buzzed. A text from Luke. "I just got back from the bank. Huge withdrawal." "She's moving faster than we thought." I showed them the message. Kira stood up again. "I need to make some calls. Sergio, get me Mitchell's number." As they left the room, Nancy slipped in through the patio doors. "You need to see this." She handed me her tablet. "Just found it on Ainsley's cloud drive." I scrolled through what looked like email exchanges between Ainsley and someone named Alex. Travel arrangements, offshore accounts, plans for after the wedding. "There's more," Nancy said quietly. "Keep reading." My hands started shaking as I got to the older emails. She planned this before Dad got sick. Looks like it. She was counting on the inheritance even then. The door opened and Kira returned, phone in hand. "Mitchell's filing an emergency injunction to freeze the accounts, but..." She stopped, seeing my face. "What's wrong?" I handed her the tablet. She read quickly, her expression hardening. "This changes things," she said finally. "Sergio." He came running back in. "What is it?" "Your fiancée didn't just steal from her family. She may have had something to do with their father's death." The room went silent. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "That's impossible," I whispered, but even as I said it, memories started clicking into place. Ainsley's sudden interest in Dad's medication, her insistence on being the one to organise his care. My phone rang. Luke again. "Des, you need to get home. Now." "What's wrong?" "Someone broke into your apartment." I was out the door before he finished speaking, Nancy right behind me. When we reached my building, Luke was waiting outside with 2 police officers. "Nothing was taken," he said as we rushed upstairs. "But..." My apartment was a mess, but not a random one. Every drawer was pulled out, every file scattered. On my kitchen wall, written in what looked like red lipstick, "Back off." "Classic intimidation tactic," one officer said, taking photos. "Do you know who might have done this?" I caught Luke's eye. We both knew, but without proof. "I'll need to file a report," I said instead. After the police left, Luke, Nancy, and I sat among the chaos of my apartment. "She's desperate," Nancy said, helping me pick up scattered papers. "This proves it." "She's dangerous," Luke corrected. "Maybe we should stop." "No." I stood up, finding Dad's photo among the mess. His smile so similar to Ainsley's, but genuine, warm. "She doesn't get to win. Not after this." My phone buzzed again. "Sergio. Mother has a plan. Meeting tonight at 8. Bring everything." I showed the others the text. "You in?" Nancy squeezed my hand. "Always." Luke sighed but nodded. "Someone has to keep you from doing anything too crazy." That evening, we gathered in Kira's study. Me, Luke, Nancy, Sergio, Kira, and Mitchell. 6 people against my sister's carefully constructed house of cards. "The wedding is tomorrow," Kira said, spreading blueprints of the venue across her desk. "Everything needs to be perfect, until it isn't." Mitchell adjusted his glasses. "The police are ready. They just need our signal." "And the evidence?" "All here." He patted his briefcase. including those emails. I looked around at these people who were risking so much to help me. Thank you, all of you. Kira's smile was sharp. Save your thanks for tomorrow, dear. We're about to give your sister a wedding she'll never forget. As we finalized the details, my phone lit up with a text from Ainsley. Can't wait to share my special day with you, sis. Sleep well. I texted back. Wouldn't miss it for the world. The bridal suite buzzed with nervous energy as makeup artists and hairstylists fluttered around Ainsley. She sat in front of a massive mirror, looking every bit the perfect bride. Your turn, Des, she called out, patting the chair next to her. Can't have my maid of honor looking anything less than perfect. I caught Nancy's eye in the mirror as I sat down. She gave a subtle nod. Everything was in place. You seem calm, I said to Ainsley while a stylist started on my hair. Why wouldn't I be? She smiled, but her fingers kept fidgeting with her diamond bracelet. It's my perfect day. My phone buzzed. Luke. Police are here. Undercover. Mitchell has the papers ready. Who keeps texting you? Ainsley snapped. Just work stuff. I slipped the phone away. Hey, remember Dad's wedding toast at Cousin Rachel's wedding? The makeup brush in her hand froze. Why are you bringing that up? Just thinking about him today. Wish he could be here. Well, he's not. She stood abruptly, her white robe swishing. I need air. Everyone out, except Des. The room cleared quickly. As soon as the door closed, Ainsley's perfect bride facade cracked. What game are you playing? She hissed. No game, just remembering Dad's favorite saying. The truth always comes out. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging in. Listen carefully. In 2 hours, I'm walking down that aisle. Nothing is going to stop that. Understand? A knock at the door made us both jump. Kira entered, elegant in deep blue. Everything all right, girls? Her eyes fixed on Ainsley's grip on my arm. Ainsley released me instantly, smile back in place. Perfect. Just sister stuff. Wonderful. Kira held up a small box. I brought something for you, dear. Family tradition. Inside was a delicate pearl necklace. Ainsley's eyes widened. It's beautiful, she breathed. Let me help you put it on. Kira moved behind her, catching my eye in the mirror. You know, my grandmother always said pearls represent tears. Funny tradition for a wedding, isn't it? Ainsley's smile flickered. I should finish getting ready. Of course. Kira headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Ainsley, your mother would be proud. You look just like her. The moment she left, Ainsley grabbed her phone, fingers shaking as she typed. My own phone buzzed. Nancy. Package in her room, right where she said it would be. Everything okay? I asked innocently. Fine, Ainsley practically shouted. Everything's fine. Where's my dress? The next hour passed in a blur of white tulle and nervous energy. As I helped Ainsley into her gown, I noticed she kept checking her phone, growing more agitated each time. Another text from Luke. Ready when you are. Time for the photos, the wedding planner burst in. Everyone in position. Outside, guests were arriving. I spotted Sergio greeting them, playing his part perfectly. Luke stood by the entrance, chatting with Mitchell. Everything was ready. Des, Ainsley called from behind me. For a moment she sounded like my little sister again, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Do you think Mom and Dad would really be proud? I turned to look at her, this beautiful broken person who'd destroyed our family for money. I think they'd want you to do the right thing. Her face hardened. The right thing is subjective. She checked her phone one last time, then straightened her shoulders. Let's get this show on the road. As we lined up for the processional, Nancy squeezed my hand. You okay? I nodded, watching Ainsley adjust her veil. Ask me again in an hour. The wedding planner started organising everyone. Places, please. We start in 5 minutes. Ainsley's phone buzzed one final time. As she read the message, all the colour drained from her face. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Problem? I asked. She grabbed her clutch, hands shaking. I have to. The wedding march started playing. Guests stood up. Sergio waited at the altar. Ready? I asked my sister. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. What did you do? Nothing yet. I straightened her veil. But Dad always said the truth comes out. Remember? The doors opened. The bridesmaids started walking. It's your perfect day, sis, I whispered. Wouldn't want to keep everyone waiting. As we took our places for the processional, I saw Mitchell slip into the back row, briefcase in hand. Luke nodded from his position. Nancy adjusted her bouquet, where her phone was ready to record everything. The wedding march reached its crescendo. All eyes turned to the bride. Ainsley took her first step down the aisle, clutching her bouquet like a lifeline, unaware that her perfect day was about to become her worst nightmare. The string quartet played softly as Ainsley floated down the aisle, every eye in the cathedral fixed on her. She looked perfect, too perfect, like a porcelain doll about to shatter. The minister began his speech about love and trust, but I barely heard him. I was watching Sergio, waiting for our signal. If anyone has reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, the minister intoned, speak now or forever hold your peace. Sergio cleared his throat. Actually, I have something to say. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ainsley's grip on her bouquet tightened. Darling, she said through clenched teeth, what are you doing? Something I should have done weeks ago. He turned to face the guests. I'm sorry, but this wedding is a fraud. And so is the bride. The murmuring grew louder. I saw phones coming out, recording. Sergio, please, Ainsley whispered, reaching for his hand. He stepped back. Mitchell, would you like to explain why you're here? Mitchell stood, his briefcase in hand. Ms. Franklin, would you care to explain this? He held up a document. It's your father's real will, the one you forged a new version of. Gasps echoed through the church. Ainsley spun around, her veil whipping through the air. This is ridiculous. Des, tell them... Tell them what? I stepped forward. That you stole our inheritance? That you planned to take the money and run after the wedding? That's not... She stopped as Kira walked up the aisle holding something. Looking for this. Kira held up a small carry-on suitcase. Found it in your dressing room. Quite a lot of cash inside. Along with this. She pulled out the fake passport. Ainsley lunged for the suitcase, her wedding dress rustling. That's private property. Actually, a voice called from the back, it's evidence. A police detective stood up, badge in hand. Along with these emails we found. Nancy stepped forward, her phone displaying the incriminating messages. You should really use better passwords, Ainsley. The colour drained from my sister's face. She looked around wildly like a trapped animal. You don't understand, she said, her voice breaking. None of you understand. I deserve that money. I was always the one who got left behind, the one who wasn't good enough. So you forged Dad's will? Luke called out. Made him sign it when he was too sick to know what he was signing? He wanted me to have it. She was screaming now, mascara running down her cheeks. He told me. He told you to take care of your sister. I cut in. Those were his last words. But you couldn't even do that, could you? The detective was walking down the aisle now, another officer beside him. Ainsley backed away from them, bumping into the altar. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. Ainsley Franklin, the detective said. You're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and grand theft. You have the right to remain silent. She bolted, or tried to. Her heel caught in her dress train, and she went down hard, scattering rose petals across the marble floor. The church erupted in chaos. Guests stood, phones recording everything. The officers helped Ainsley up, reading her rights as they cuffed her. You, she spat at me as they led her past. You planned this. Your own sister. No, I said quietly. You did this. Every single bit of it. She struggled against the officers. I hate you. I've always hated you. Perfect Desiree, everyone's favourite. Save it for your lawyer, Kira cut in coldly. As they took her away, her veil fell to the ground. I picked it up, the delicate lace trembling in my hands. The guests started filing out, whispering among themselves. Luke came to stand beside me, putting an arm around my shoulders. You okay? I nodded, watching Sergio talk to the police. Did we do the right thing? She gave us no choice, Nancy said, joining us. You saw those emails. She was going to take everything and disappear. Mitchell approached, holding a stack of papers. The courts will need statements from all of you. And there's the matter of reinstating the original will. Later, Luke said firmly. Right now, my sister needs a drink. As we walked down the aisle, past the abandoned flowers and scattered programs, I heard someone whisper, "Best wedding ever." I couldn't help but laugh even as tears pricked my eyes. Dad always said go big or go home. Outside, reporters were already gathering. Kira took charge, directing them away from us toward her PR team. Come on, Nancy linked her arm through mine. Let's get out of here before they realize you're the wronged sister. In the parking lot, I looked back at the church one last time. The string quartet was packing up, the flowers already wilting in the afternoon sun. Hey, Luke called, holding open his car door. You coming? I took one last look at the church where my sister's perfect day had turned into her worst nightmare, then turned away. Yeah, I said. I'm coming. The courthouse was quieter than I expected. 3 months after the wedding that wasn't, I sat in the front row, watching my sister in her orange jumpsuit. All rise, the bailiff called out. Ainsley didn't look at me as she stood. She hadn't looked at me once during the entire trial. Before we proceed with sentencing, the judge said, would the defendant like to make a statement? Ainsley's lawyer nudged her. She stood slowly, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, so different from her elaborate wedding updo. Her voice cracked. She started again. I never meant for things to go this far. That's not what the evidence suggests, the judge replied. The prosecution has shown this was a carefully planned series of crimes spanning several months. You don't understand. Ainsley's voice grew stronger. My whole life I've watched Desiree get everything. The grades, the praise, Dad's approval. So you forged his will? He was dying anyway. She spun around, finally looking at me. You weren't there. You were too busy with your perfect life while I took care of him. Ms. Franklin, the judge warned. You want to know the truth? Ainsley continued, tears streaming down her face. I did it because I could. Because for once in my life, I wanted to be the one who won. Is that what you want to hear, Des? Nancy squeezed my hand as I stood up. Your Honor, I said. May I speak? The judge nodded. Ainsley, I turned to my sister. Do you remember when Mum died? You were 12. You crawled into my bed every night for months. Don't, she whispered. You said you were scared of being alone, and I promised you'd never be alone, that we'd always have each other's backs. Stop it. But somewhere along the way, you decided that wasn't enough, that love wasn't enough, that you needed to win, even if it meant destroying our family. You don't know what it's like, she shouted, living in your shadow. No, I agreed, but I know what it's like to lose my sister. And that hurts more than any amount of money you stole. The judge cleared his throat. If there are no further statements, I'm ready to proceed with sentencing. What happened next seemed to move in slow motion. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom. 5 years in state prison, restitution of all stolen funds, possibility of parole after 3 years with good behavior. Ainsley collapsed into her chair. Her lawyer patted her shoulder awkwardly. As the bailiff led her away, she stopped briefly beside me. I really did love you once, she whispered. I still love you, I replied. That's the difference between us. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Luke pushed through them, creating a path to the car where Sergio waited. How does it feel to see justice served? Someone shouted. Will you press additional charges? What about the wedding expenses? Kira appeared suddenly, her PR team in tow. The family has no comment at this time. Please respect their privacy. In the car, Sergio handed me a tissue. You okay? Ask me tomorrow. I looked at the manila envelope in my lap. Dad's original will, finally executed properly. What about you? He smiled sadly. I'm selling the ring, donating the money to fraud prevention charities. Speaking of money, Mitchell said from the front seat, we need to discuss what you want to do with the estate. I opened the envelope. looking at the figures that had caused so much damage. Actually, I have an idea about that. Later that evening, we gathered at Luke's place, the same group that had planned Ainsley's downfall, now planning something very different. A foundation, Nancy read over the proposal I'd drafted. For women in financial crisis, I explained. Legal aid, financial literacy, emergency assistance, everything I wished I'd had when this started. Dad would have loved that, Luke said quietly. What are you going to call it? Kira asked. I thought about Mom, about Dad, about the little girl Ainsley used to be. Second chances. Perfect, Sergio raised his glass. 2 second chances. As everyone clinked glasses, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Package arrived for you at the prison. From your sister. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Ainsley's familiar handwriting. Des, I'm sorry. Not just for the money. For everything. You were right. Love should have been enough. Maybe someday I'll figure out why it wasn't. Nancy peered over my shoulder. You okay? I folded the note carefully, tucking it away. Ask me in 5 years. When she gets out? Yeah. I looked around at my chosen family, the people who'd helped me through the darkest days. Maybe by then we'll both be ready for a second chance. Luke raised his glass again. To family, the ones we're born with and the ones we choose. To family, we echoed, and I felt something inside me finally begin to heal. The autumn breeze rustled through the cemetery as I placed fresh flowers on Dad's grave. The sound of footsteps behind me made me turn. I wasn't sure you'd come, I said. Ainsley stood there in simple jeans and a sweater, her blonde hair shorter now, less perfect. Prison had changed her in subtle ways. I almost didn't. She knelt beside me, touching the headstone. First time I've been here since... I know. We sat in silence, watching leaves dance across the grass. The foundation's doing well, I said finally. We just opened our 3rd office. I saw the article. She plucked at the grass. Nancy sent me the clipping. She writes to me sometimes. That was news to me. What else does she write about? Luke's baby. Sergio's engagement. You. She looked up. Why didn't you tell me you were using my wedding venue as the foundation's headquarters? Wasn't sure how you'd feel about it. She laughed. A real laugh, not the practiced one I remembered. It's perfect, actually. Poetic justice. My phone buzzed, a text from Mitchell. Papers are ready when you are. That's why I'm really here, Ainsley said, catching my expression. The restitution papers. I pulled the envelope from my bag. You don't have to sign them. The parole board already approved your release. I want to. She took the papers, scanning them quickly. Using my share of Dad's inheritance to fund the foundation, it feels right. You could keep it. Start over somewhere. She shook her head. I need to fix what I broke. Or at least try. I handed her a pen. She signed quickly, then handed everything back. So what now? I asked. Now? She stood up, brushing grass from her jeans. Now I get a job. A real one. Luke offered me a position at his company. Entry level, minimum wage. Really? He said everyone deserves a second chance, even little sisters who screw up spectacularly. I smiled, remembering our foundation's name. He's right. Des? Her voice wavered slightly. That day in court, when you said you still loved me, did you mean it? Instead of answering, I reached into my bag and pulled out an old photo album. Remember this? She sat back down, opening it carefully. Inside were pictures of us as kids, birthday parties, dance recitals, family vacations. Mum's camera, she whispered. You kept it? Look at the last page. She turned to find a recent photo, Nancy's birthday party last week. Luke was there with his wife and baby, Sergio and his new fiancée, Kira, and several women from the foundation. There's an empty chair, she noted. We always leave one, just in case. Her fingers traced the empty seat. You really never gave up on me, did you? You're my sister. That doesn't change, even when everything else does. She closed the album, wiping her eyes. I don't deserve you. Probably not, I agreed, making her laugh through her tears. But family isn't about deserving, it's about choosing to stay even when it's hard. Standing up, I held out my hand. Come on, Nancy's making dinner. That empty chair's waiting. She hesitated. Everyone will be there. Everyone who matters. What if they hate me? They might, I admitted. For a while. But they also might surprise you. They surprised me. She took my hand, letting me pull her up. As we walked to the car, she stopped suddenly. I never asked, what happened to my wedding dress? Donated it to a women's shelter. They cut it up and made christening gowns for babies. She smiled. Perfect. One last thing. She turned back to Dad's grave. I'm sorry, Daddy, for everything. I'm trying to be better. The breeze picked up, scattering leaves around us like confetti, nature's gentler version of that dramatic wedding day. My phone buzzed again. Nancy, dinner's ready. Is she coming? I looked at Ainsley questioningly. She nodded. We're on our way, I texted back. As we drove through the familiar streets, Ainsley fiddled with her seatbelt. Tell me something good, she said quietly. The foundation helped its 1,000th client last week. A woman named Sarah. She reminded me of you, actually. Yeah, smart, determined. Made some mistakes but wasn't ready to let them define her. Ainsley smiled, watching the city pass by. Sounds like there's hope for all of us then. There always was, I said, turning onto Nancy's street. You just had to want it badly enough. We pulled up to the house, warm light spilling from the windows, voices and laughter drifting out. Ready? I asked. Ainsley squared her shoulders, echoing words from a different time, a different person. Ask me tomorrow. But this time, when she smiled, it reached her eyes.
I'm sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the old, chipped mug that's been with me for more years than I care to remember. It's just a regular Tuesday evening, but somehow it feels like the weight of my entire life is pressing down on me. I'm Emma, a 45-year-old woman who feels like she's living a life filled with more regrets than joys. My husband, Richard, is sitting across from me, scrolling through his phone, utterly disinterested in anything I have to say. I met him when I was just a bright-eyed 20-year-old. He was charming, charismatic, and everything I thought I wanted. But here we are, 25 years later, and I can barely recognize the man I fell in love with. Dinner was good, I say, attempting to start a conversation. He doesn't even look up. It was okay. You've made better. His words sting, but I'm used to it. This has been my life for the past several years. The man I married, who once looked at me like I was his entire world, now barely acknowledges my existence unless it's to criticize me. I remember when I first introduced Richard to my dad. My dad was a police officer, a man who had seen the worst of people in his line of work. He took one look at Richard and said, "Emma, that man is bad news." But I was young and in love, and I thought my dad was just being overprotective. "Dad, you don't know him like I do. Richard is a good man," I had insisted. "Emma, I've been a cop for over 30 years. I know how to read people. That man is going to bring you nothing but trouble," my father had replied, his voice laced with concern. But I didn't listen. In fact, I did something I now deeply regret. I cut my father out of my life. Richard suggested it, saying we didn't need negative people who didn't believe in us. And like a fool, I agreed. For 25 years, I didn't speak to my dad. I didn't call him, didn't visit, didn't even tell him when I had my daughter Lily, who's now in college. My thoughts are interrupted by Richard's voice. "Are you even listening to me?" I realize he's been talking while I was lost in my thoughts. "Sorry, what were you saying?" "I was saying that you need to start taking better care of yourself. You've let yourself go. And it's embarrassing," he says, his tone cold. I feel a lump form in my throat. This is my life. A husband who finds every opportunity to bring me down. And as I sit there, taking in his harsh words, I can't help but think that my father was right all along. My phone rings, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glance at the caller ID and my heart skips a beat. It's a number I haven't seen in over 2 decades. It's my dad. I answer, my voice shaky. "Hello?" "Emma, it's your dad. I need to talk to you. It's important. His voice is weak, nothing like the strong, confident tone I remember. Dad, I'm so sorry for everything. I start, but he cuts me off. Emma, I'm sick. The doctors say I don't have much time left. I have cancer. The room spins around me as his words sink in. My dad, the man I turned my back on, is dying. And suddenly, all the years of silence, all the missed opportunities to make things right, weigh heavily on me. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'll come to see you. I'll help in any way I can, I say, tears streaming down my face. After ending the call, I turn to Richard, hoping, maybe foolishly, for some kind of support. Richard, my dad is sick. He has cancer. I need to help him. His reaction is like a slap in the face. Good. The man never liked me. Can't wait for him to be gone. His words are like a knife to my heart. In that moment, I realize just how blind I've been. My husband, the man I chose over my own father, is cruel and heartless. And I can't help but wonder if my life would have been different if I had just listened to my dad all those years ago. I'm sitting on the edge of the bed in our bedroom, my hands trembling. The room feels cold, even though it's a warm night. Richard's words keep echoing in my head. Can't wait for him to be gone. How can he be so heartless? I thought I knew him, but it seems I've been living with a stranger. I pick up my phone again, dialing my dad's number. It rings, and then finally, he picks up. Emma? His voice is weak but filled with hope. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm going to help you. I don't know how yet, but I will find a way, I say, my voice choked with emotion. Emma, you don't have to. You've got your own life. No, Dad. You're my father. I should have been there for you all these years. I'm going to make this right. We talk a little more. He tells me about his condition, about the treatments he needs but can't afford. My heart aches. I've missed so much, and now, when he needs me the most, I feel helpless. After the call, I sit there, lost in thought. Then something inside me clicks. I can't let my father suffer because of my mistakes. I need to do something. I go to the living room where Richard is watching TV. Richard, I've decided. I'm going to help my father. He needs money for his treatments. I'm going to use our savings. He looks at me like I've lost my mind. You're going to do what? Are you crazy? That's our money, Emma. We saved that for us, for our future. There won't be a future if I let my father die knowing I could have helped him. I can't live with that, I say, my resolve firm. He laughs, a cold, mocking laugh. So the prodigal daughter returns. You think playing the good daughter now will make up for all the years you ignored him? It's pathetic. His words sting, but I don't let them sway me. I don't care what you think. I'm doing this. I go to our home office and start transferring the money. It's a lot, almost all our savings. But it doesn't matter. This is for my dad, for all the years I wasn't there for him. When I finish, I feel a sense of relief, but it's short-lived. Richard storms into the room, his face red with anger. You actually did it. You gave our money to that old man. He's my father, Richard. He's dying. What was I supposed to do? Just let him suffer? You were supposed to think about us, about our life together. But you've always been selfish, Emma, always thinking about yourself. I'm stunned. How can he twist this into something about him? Selfish? I'm trying to save my father's life. How is that selfish? He doesn't answer. Instead, he turns and leaves the room, slamming the door behind him. I'm left standing there, feeling more alone than ever. But there's also a sense of determination inside me. For the first time in years, I'm standing up for what I believe in. It's scary, but it also feels right. I pack a small bag with some clothes and essentials. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I can't stay here, not with Richard. Not now. I write a note, telling him I'm going to my dad's, that I need some time to figure things out. I don't know if he'll even care, but I leave it on the kitchen counter anyway. Then, with my bag in hand, I step out of the house. The night air is cool on my skin, and as I walk to my car, I feel like I'm taking the first steps towards a new life. A life where I'm no longer bound by regrets and what-ifs. A life where I can try to make things right, even if it's a little too late. The drive to my dad's house feels endless. Streetlights blur past, and I'm alone with my thoughts, a mix of fear and determination. I haven't seen my dad in over 25 years, and now I'm rushing to him in the middle of the night because he's sick and I'm all he's got. When I finally pull up to the familiar old house, my heart is racing. The place looks much the same, though a bit more worn. I hesitate for a moment before getting out of the car. What am I going to say? How is he going to react? Taking a deep breath, I walk up to the front door and knock. It takes a few moments, but then the door opens, and there he is. My dad. He's older, frailer, but it's undeniably him. "Emma," he says, his voice cracking. "You came." I nod, fighting back tears. "I'm here, Dad. I'm so sorry." He steps aside, letting me in. The house smells the same as I remember, a mix of coffee and old books. We go to the living room and sit down. It's awkward at first, but then we start talking, and it's like the years start to melt away. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have been here," I say, my voice thick with emotion. "It's okay, Emma. You're here now. That's what matters." We talk about his illness, about the treatments he needs. He shows me the medical bills, and they're staggering, but I reassure him that I've got it covered. He tries to protest, but I won't hear it. Then I tell him about Richard, about how he reacted when I said I was going to help. I don't go into all the details, just that we had a fight and that I needed some time away. My dad listens, his expression somber. "I warned you about him, Emma, but you were young, in love. I understand." "But you were right, Dad. You were right all along." He reaches out, taking my hand. "What are you going to do now?" I shake my head. "I don't know, Dad. I just don't know." We sit there for a while, just talking. It's strange, but it feels good, like we're making up for lost time. Eventually, I get up to leave. I've got a lot to figure out, and it's late. But as I'm about to walk out the door, my dad stops me. "Emma, wait. There's something you should know." He goes to his desk and pulls out a folder, thick with papers. "I've been keeping tabs on Richard. Ever since you married him. I knew he was bad news, and I wanted to protect you, just in case." He hands me the folder. It's all in there. His business deals, the women, everything. I wanted you to have it, just in case. I'm stunned. I take the folder, feeling its weight. "Dad, Thank you." He nods, a sad smile on his face. "I always wanted what was best for you, Emma. Always." I hug him, holding back tears. "I know, Dad. I know." The morning after I visited my dad, I'm sitting at my kitchen table, the folder he gave me lying unopened in front of me. I'm scared of what's inside, scared of what it means for my life, my marriage. But I know I can't ignore it. Taking a deep breath, I open the folder. There are bank statements, photos, notes. It's overwhelming. As I start to sift through the papers, the reality of my situation begins to sink in. Richard has been living a double life, and I was too blind to see it. There are photos of him with other women, some of them looking way too cozy. There are bank statements showing large amounts of money being moved around, and notes about shady business deals. It's a lot to process. I feel sick to my stomach. How could I have been so naive? How could I have ignored all the signs? I spend the morning going through everything, and by the time I'm done, I'm shaking with anger and betrayal. But there's also a sense of clarity. I know what I need to do. I call my dad. "Dad, I looked through the folder. It's a lot." "I'm sorry, Emma. I didn't want to burden you with it, but you needed to know." "I understand, and thank you. I'm going to confront him. I can't let this go on any longer." "Be careful, Emma. He's a dangerous man." "I will be. I have to do this, for me, for us." After we hang up, I get ready. I feel like I'm preparing for battle. I put the most damning evidence in a smaller folder and head to Richard's office. When I get there, his secretary tries to stop me, but I push past her. I storm into his office, and he looks up, surprised. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I say, my voice steady even though my hands are shaking. He smirks. "About what?" "About this," I say, throwing the folder on his desk. "About your lies, your cheating, your dirty business." He goes pale, but then he regains his composure. You don't know what you're talking about. I know everything, Richard. My dad has been keeping tabs on you since we got married. It's all here. The women, the money, everything. He starts to get angry. Your dad? That old fool? He's just trying to break us up. He's always hated me. He was right about you, and I was too blind to see it, but not anymore. He stands up, coming around the desk. You're not going to ruin me, Emma. You're my wife. You're supposed to stand by me. Not anymore. I want a divorce, Richard. I want out of this sham of a marriage. He laughs, a cold, bitter laugh. You think you can just walk away? You think you can take me down? I won't let you. I'll ruin you first. I stand my ground, even though I'm scared. I'm not afraid of you anymore. I know the truth, and I'm not going to let you control me any longer. He looks at me, really looks at me, and I can see the realization dawning in his eyes. He knows he's lost. Get out, he says finally. Get out and don't come back. The next few days are a blur. I spend most of my time at my dad's house, trying to figure out my next move. The thought of going back to the house I shared with Richard makes my skin crawl. I can't face him, not yet. My dad is a rock during all of this. He listens, offers advice, but mostly just lets me talk. It's comforting, being here with him. It feels like I'm making up for lost time. One afternoon, we're sitting in the living room when my phone rings. It's a number I don't recognize, but I answer it anyway. Hello? Is this Emma Richards? A man's voice asks. Yes, it is. Who's this? My name is Detective Harris. I'm with the City Police Department. I'd like to talk to you about your husband. My heart skips a beat. What about him? We've been investigating him for some time now. We believe he's involved in a number of illegal activities. We received some information recently that has accelerated our investigation. I glance at my dad, who's watching me closely. What kind of information? It's best if we discuss this in person. Can you come down to the station? Yes, of course. I'll be there as soon as I can. I hang up, feeling a mix of fear and relief. It's happening. It's really happening. Dad, the police want to talk to me about Richard. They think he's involved in illegal activities. My dad nods. It's about time. You need to tell them everything, Emma. Don't hold back. I won't. I'm done protecting him. I head to the police station, my mind racing. When I get there, Detective Harris is waiting for me. He's a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a serious demeanor. Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Richards, he says as he leads me to an interview room. Please, call me Emma, and thank you for seeing me. We sit down, and he gets right to the point. We've been investigating your husband for some time. We believe he's involved in a number of fraudulent activities, including money laundering and embezzlement. I nod, trying to keep my composure. I believe you're right. I have some evidence that might help. I tell him everything. About the folder my dad gave me, about the bank statements, the photos, the notes. I tell him about the confrontation with Richard, about how he threatened me. Detective Harris listens, taking notes. When I'm done, he looks at me, his expression serious. This is very helpful, Emma. With your testimony and the evidence you've provided, we can build a strong case against your husband. What happens now? I ask, feeling a mix of emotions. We'll continue our investigation, gather more evidence. It's likely we'll need you to testify in court. Are you prepared for that? I nod, feeling a surge of determination. Yes, I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he pays for what he's done. Detective Harris nods. Good, we'll be in touch. And Emma, you're doing the right thing. I spend my days helping Dad around the house and taking him to his doctor's appointments. His health seems to be holding steady, a small blessing in the midst of everything else. One afternoon, while we're sitting in the living room, my phone buzzes with a message from Detective Harris. My heart leaps into my throat as I read it. Case moving forward. Charges filed against Richard. We'll need you to testify. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Dad, they're charging Richard. It's actually happening. Dad looks up from his newspaper, his eyes soft. Good. It's about time he faced the consequences. The day of the trial arrives. I wear a simple blue dress, wanting to look presentable but not overdressed. Dad insists on coming with me, even though I tell him he doesn't have to. "I'm not letting you face that man alone," he says, his voice firm. The courtroom is intimidating, with its high ceilings and wooden pews. Richard is already there, looking smug in his expensive suit. When he sees me, his expression darkens. I take my seat, trying to ignore the knots in my stomach. Dad sits next to me, a solid presence at my side. The trial begins. The prosecutor lays out the case against Richard. Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. The evidence is overwhelming. I can see Richard squirming in his seat. Then it's my turn to testify. I take the stand, my hands shaking slightly. The prosecutor asks me to tell the court about my relationship with Richard, about the money he took, the abuse, the threats. I speak slowly, making sure to tell the truth, the whole truth. Richard's lawyer tries to shake me with his questions, but I stand firm. I'm not afraid of Richard anymore. When I'm done, I step down from the stand, feeling like a weight has been lifted from my shoulders. Dad gives me a small smile, his eyes proud. The trial goes on for several days. Witnesses, evidence, testimonies, it all blurs together. But through it all, I can see the case against Richard building, piece by piece. Finally, the jury goes out to deliberate. The wait is agonizing, every second stretching out endlessly. Dad and I don't talk much, just sit together in silent support. Then, the moment of truth arrives. The jury is back. We're called into the courtroom. My heart is pounding so hard I can barely hear anything else. The judge asks the jury for their verdict. The foreman stands up, a slip of paper in his hand. "We find the defendant, Richard Richards, guilty on all counts." A wave of relief washes over me, so strong I almost feel dizzy. Richard is staring at the jury, his face a mask of disbelief. The judge thanks the jury and then turns to Richard. "Given the severity of the crimes and the evidence presented, I hereby sentence you to 10 years in prison and order the return of all funds embezzled from Emma Richards." Richard's face crumples. He starts to say something, but the bailiffs are already leading him away. As I walk out of the courtroom, I feel like I'm walking on air. Justice has been served. Richard will pay for what he's done. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can finally start to move on. Dad puts his arm around me as we walk. "I'm proud of you, Emma. You stood up to him. You did what was right." I lean into him, feeling tears prick my eyes. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you." We walk out of the courthouse together, ready to face whatever comes next. Life after the trial feels different, like waking up from a long, turbulent dream. The house is quieter now, just me and Dad. We've settled into a comfortable routine, looking after each other. But there's one thing I haven't done yet, one loose end that still nags at me. My daughter, Lily. I've been thinking about her a lot, about how I've been a less than perfect mother, how I let her grow up in a toxic environment. The guilt gnaws at me every day. But today, I decide, is the day I'll try to make things right. I pick up my phone and dial her number, my hands trembling slightly. "Mom?" Lily sounds surprised when she answers. "Hey, Lily, can we talk? Maybe meet somewhere?" There's a pause, and for a moment, I'm afraid she'll say no. But then she agrees, and we decide to meet at a small cafe near her college. I arrive early, nervous energy making me fidgety. When Lily walks in, my heart aches. She's grown into a beautiful young woman, but there's a wariness in her eyes that I hate to see. "Hey," I say as she sits down. "Hey," she replies, her voice guarded. I take a deep breath. "Lily, I'm sorry. I know I wasn't the mother you needed. I let you down, let you grow up in a bad situation. I'm so sorry." Lily looks at me, her expression unreadable. "Why now, Mom? Why after all this time?" "I know it's late, way too late. But I've left Richard, your father. He's in jail now. I've been trying to make things right, and I realized I need to start with you." Lily's eyes flicker with something, pain maybe, or disappointment. "Mom, I spent years wishing you'd leave him, wishing we could just be a normal family, but you always chose him over me." Her words sting, but they're the truth. I know, and I can't change that, but I'm here now. I want to be better, do better, if you give me a chance. We sit in silence for a long time. I can see Lily wrestling with her emotions, and I don't blame her. I've hurt her, and it's not something that can be fixed with a simple apology. Finally, she speaks. I want to believe you, Mom, but it's not easy. I've got a lot of anger, a lot of hurt. I know, and I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I just want a chance to show you that I can be a better mother, that I can be someone you can rely on. Lily sighs, running a hand through her hair. Okay, we can try, but it's going to take time. A wave of relief washes over me. Thank you, Lily. That's all I'm asking for. We talk for a while longer about her college, her plans for the future. It's awkward at times, but it feels like a start, like maybe there's a chance for us to build something new. Months pass, and the world around me starts to take on a new shape, a new meaning. Dad's health has been improving steadily. The doctors call it a miracle, but I think it's the love and care we've been surrounding him with. He's even started going for short walks around the neighborhood. Today, as I watch him sitting on the porch, reading a newspaper, a sense of calm washes over me. I walk over and sit beside him, taking in the peaceful morning. You're looking better every day, Dad, I say, smiling at him. He looks up, his eyes twinkling. Feeling better too, Emma. It's like I've been given a second chance at life. I nod, feeling a surge of gratitude. We both have, Dad. Just then, Lily arrives. She's been visiting more often, and with each visit, I feel our bond strengthening. She waves at us, a bright smile on her face. Morning, you two, she greets cheerfully. Morning, Lily, Dad replies. Join us. We were just enjoying the morning sun. Lily takes a seat, and for a while, we sit in comfortable silence, basking in the warmth of the sun and each other's company. Mom, I've been thinking, Lily starts, breaking the silence. I want to help people who've been in situations like ours, maybe volunteer at a shelter or something. My heart swells with pride. That's a wonderful idea, Lily. Dad nods in agreement. Using your experience to help others, that's a noble path. Lily's eyes are determined. I want to make a difference, even if it's small. I reach out and squeeze her hand. You already are, sweetheart. Our conversation drifts to lighter topics after that. Plans for the weekend, a new recipe I want to try, the book Dad's been reading. It feels normal, and for the first time in a long time, I feel content. I have my father, my daughter, and a newfound strength within me. I've survived the storm, and now I'm ready to embrace the calm after it. Ready to build a new life, a better life. A life where I'm not just surviving, but thriving. My name is Emma. I'm 30 years old, and I work as a financial advisor. That's where I met David, my now ex-husband. I remember that day like it was yesterday. He walked into my office with a stack of papers and a troubled look on his face. Emma, right? He said, offering a handshake. I'm David Caldwell. I heard you're the best in sorting out financial messes. That's what they say, I replied, smiling. Let's see what we can do about yours. David was tall, with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to smile even when he didn't. As I sifted through his documents, we started talking. It wasn't just about numbers and taxes. We talked about our favorite movies, music, and even debated over the best pizza in town. He had this easy way about him that made hours feel like minutes. You know, I never thought sorting my finances would be this enjoyable, David admitted as we wrapped up. Guess I have a magic touch, I joked. David laughed. Would you like to grab a coffee sometime? My treat, for making this not as painful as I expected. That coffee turned into dinner, and dinners turned into weekend getaways. We were inseparable. After 6 months, David proposed, and without a moment's hesitation, I said yes. It was a whirlwind romance, but it felt right. Our wedding was simple yet beautiful. Standing there, exchanging vows, I thought I had found my forever. David's mom, Barbara, was there too. She was a stern-looking woman, but seemed happy for us. You better give me grandkids soon, she whispered to me with a half-smile. Life as a married couple was blissful at first. David worked in real estate, and I continued at my firm. We shared dinners, movie nights, and long walks. We were a team, or so I thought. However, things began to change when the topic of children came up more frequently. It started with occasional remarks from Barbara, but soon became her constant demand. She would call and ask if I was pregnant yet, and during visits she'd say, "A grandchild would make this family complete." David always laughed it off. "Mom, give us some time," he'd say, but the pressure was building. At first, I tried to be understanding. After all, she was just an excited grandmother-to-be. But her persistence started to weigh on me. It was like our marriage wasn't enough without a child. "David, your mom needs to back off a bit," I said to him one evening. "I feel like she's more in our marriage than we are." David looked uncomfortable. "She's just excited, Emma. Let's not make a big deal out of it." As time went on, Barbara's influence in our life became more and more evident. It wasn't just about her constant nagging for grandchildren. She had opinions about everything, from how we should manage our finances to what we should eat. One Saturday morning, David and I were enjoying breakfast when his phone rang. It was Barbara. David put it on speaker, as he usually did. "David, dear, are you both eating healthy? Remember, a healthy diet is important for conceiving," she said in her usual authoritative tone. David chuckled. "Yes, Mom, we're eating healthy. Don't worry." I forced a smile, but inside I was screaming. It felt like she was monitoring our every move. Things got more intense when Barbara started visiting us more frequently. One evening, she came over unannounced, carrying a stack of parenting books. "Emma, you should start reading these. It's never too early to prepare," she said, dumping the books on the coffee table. I glanced at David, hoping he would say something, but he just shrugged. "Thanks, Barbara. We'll look into them," I said, trying to sound grateful. Her visits became a regular occurrence. It was like she was keeping tabs on us, making sure we were doing everything right to have a child. And every time she brought up the topic, David would just nod and agree with her. One night, after another of Barbara's visits, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "David, we need to talk," I said, frustration evident in my voice. "What's up?" he asked, not looking up from the TV. "It's your mom. She's suffocating us with this baby talk. We barely have time to be a couple without her interference," I said. David finally looked at me. "She's just excited, Emma. She means well." "Excited or obsessed?" I countered. "It feels like she's the third person in our marriage." David sighed. "She's my mom. What do you want me to do? Tell her to stop caring?" "It's not about caring, David. It's about respecting our space, our decisions. Can't you see that?" David didn't respond. He just turned back to the TV, and that was the end of our conversation. But it wasn't the end of the issue. If anything, it only got worse. Barbara's visits became more frequent and her comments more intrusive. "You two should go on a vacation. Just relax. It'll help with conception," she suggested one day. "Maybe Emma should quit her job, reduce the stress," she said on another occasion. It felt like she was dictating our life, and David was letting her. I started feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. The love and understanding that had once bonded David and me seemed to be slipping away, lost in the shadow of Barbara's overbearing presence. The constant pressure about having a baby started to take its toll on both of us. David and I were arguing more often, and the romance that once filled our home seemed to have evaporated. Still, amidst all this, I held on to the hope that things would get better, that we'd find our way back to each other. But then came the day that changed everything. David came home late one evening, looking more downcast than usual. I was in the kitchen, trying to fix us a quick dinner. "David, is everything okay?" I asked, concerned. He slumped into a chair at the kitchen table, burying his face in his hands. "We need to talk, Emma." That tone in his voice sent a chill down my spine. I sat across from him, my heart pounding. "It's about us. Trying to have a baby," he started, not meeting my eyes. "What about it?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "We went to the doctor, remember? For those tests?" he said, finally looking up at me. I nodded. A few weeks ago, we had gone for a fertility checkup, hoping it would put Barbara's nagging to rest. David took a deep breath. "The results came in today. It's not you, Emma. It's me. I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and confusion. What do you mean? The doctor said I have a low sperm count. It's unlikely that I can father a child, he said, his voice breaking. I reached for his hand, trying to offer some comfort. David, it's okay. We can figure this out together. Maybe there's treatment or other options. He pulled his hand away, shaking his head. No, you don't understand. I won't go through any treatment. It's just not something I can do. I was stunned. But why? If there's a chance. It's my decision, Emma. I just can't, he said firmly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I loved, who always seemed so strong and confident, was giving up without even trying. David, please, don't let this come between us. We can work through it, I pleaded. He stood up, avoiding my gaze. I need some time alone to think about all this. And just like that, he walked out of the kitchen, leaving me sitting there, trying to process it all. I couldn't understand why he wouldn't even consider treatment. Was his pride more important than our chance to have a family? The next few days were like walking on eggshells. David barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was short and cold. I felt a growing distance between us, a crack in the foundation of our marriage that seemed to be widening with each passing day. Then came the day that turned the crack into a gaping hole. David had been out late again. I was in bed, pretending to be asleep when he came in. He thought I was asleep and started talking to someone on the phone. Yes, Mom, I got the results. It's not good. No, I don't want treatment. I know, but I can't. Yes, I'll figure something out. Hearing him talk to his mom about something so personal, something he barely discussed with me, felt like a betrayal. It was clear that Barbara's shadow loomed larger over our marriage than I had ever realized. I lay there in the dark, tears streaming down my face, feeling utterly alone. Our marriage was crumbling, and I didn't know how to save it. Life at home had become unbearable. David and I were like strangers, living under the same roof. The love and warmth that once defined our relationship seemed like a distant memory. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, life threw me a curveball. I had been feeling under the weather for a few days. At first, I thought it was just stress, but then I missed my period. A part of me was scared to even entertain the thought, but I knew I had to find out. So, one morning, I bought a pregnancy test. Sitting in the bathroom, waiting for the result felt like the longest few minutes of my life. And then, there it was. A positive result. I was pregnant. For a moment, I was in disbelief. After all the talk about David's infertility, this felt like a miracle. A ray of hope in the midst of our crumbling marriage. But how would David react? I decided to tell him that evening. He came home late, as usual, and barely acknowledged me. I took a deep breath and approached him. David, we need to talk, I said, my voice trembling. He looked up, his expression weary. What is it now, Emma? I'm pregnant, I blurted out. For a moment, there was silence. Then he laughed, a bitter, cynical laugh. Pregnant? How? According to the doctors, I can't. I don't know, but the test is positive. We're going to have a baby, I said, tears welling up in my eyes. He stood up abruptly, anger flashing in his eyes. This is some kind of joke, right? You're trying to trap me? I was shocked. Trap you? David, I'm telling you we're going to have a baby. Our baby. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. No, this can't be. You must have cheated. That's it, isn't it? You cheated on me. I felt like I had been slapped. Cheated? How can you even say that? I've been nothing but faithful to you. He wasn't listening. He was too consumed by his own rage and disbelief. Get out. I want you out of this house, he yelled. David, please, let's talk about this. We can go to the doctor, get a confirmation, I pleaded. But it was like talking to a wall. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. That night, I slept in the guest room, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. The next day, David was gone before I woke up. His mother, Barbara, showed up instead. The look on her face was a mix of anger and disgust. You should be ashamed of yourself, Emma. Trapping my son with another man's child, she spat. I didn't cheat on David. This child is his. I defended myself. She laughed, a cold, mocking laugh. "Do you take me for a fool? My son can't have children. You're just a gold digger, trying to secure your future." I was stunned by her cruelty. "This is David's child. I've never been with anyone else." She moved closer, her voice venomous. "You have 1 week to pack your things and leave. And don't even think about asking for alimony or child support. You won't get a dime from us." The ultimatum from Barbara was the last straw. I knew I couldn't continue living in a house filled with resentment and accusations. It was time to take control of my life, for my sake and for the baby's. First things first, I filed for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. David and his mother tried to make it difficult. They wanted a piece of everything I had, claiming it was their right. But I had a strong case. Everything I owned, all my savings and property, were mine long before David entered my life. Their attempts to grab what wasn't theirs failed miserably. As for alimony, I didn't ask for a penny. I wanted no financial ties to David. No reason for him or his mother to interfere in my life again. I was determined to start anew, free from their toxicity. I found a modest apartment, not too fancy, but cozy enough to be a fresh start. Packing up my things from the house was bittersweet. Every photo, every piece of furniture had a memory attached to it, but I was ready to leave them behind. The day I moved out, David was conspicuously absent. Maybe he couldn't face me, or perhaps he just didn't care. Either way, it didn't matter. I left the keys on the counter and closed that chapter of my life. The first few nights in my new apartment were the hardest. The silence was overwhelming, and the reality of my situation often brought me to tears. But I found solace in the little life growing inside me. Talking to my unborn child became a nightly ritual, filling the emptiness with hope and love. Gradually, life in my new apartment started to feel less like a refuge and more like a home. I found comfort in my routine, and the bond with my unborn child grew stronger each day. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some old things, I found a photo of David and me from happier times. A pang of sadness hit me, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of relief. That chapter of my life was over. Then my phone rang. It was David. "Emma, I've received the divorce papers," he said, his voice emotionless. "I'm glad they reached you. Please take care of the formalities," I responded calmly. There was a pause before he added, "I won't bother you about the baby. You won't hear from me again." It was a cold goodbye, but it was closure. As I hung up, I realized that in my solitude, I had found an inner strength I never knew I had. I was ready to face the future, not as David's estranged wife, but as a strong, independent woman and a loving mother. It was a quiet evening, and I was sitting on the couch, browsing through a magazine while Jacob, my 4-year-old son, played with his toys on the floor. The peace was interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Puzzled, I went to answer it, wondering who it could be at this hour. Standing there was a woman I barely recognized, but her eyes held a familiar sorrow. "Hi, Emma. It's been a long time," she said hesitantly. It took me a moment, but then I recognized her as Linda, a friend I had known through my ex-husband. "Linda, yes, it has been. What brings you here?" She shifted uncomfortably, looking past me at Jacob, who was now peeking around my legs. "I thought you should know. About David." David. Just hearing his name after all these years sent a chill down my spine. "What about him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Linda sighed. "He's not doing well, Emma. After you left, things went downhill for him. He became an alcoholic. He remarried a few years ago and had a child, but the boy was born with disabilities. David couldn't handle it. He left them, divorced his wife, and now he's refusing to pay child support. He's in legal trouble." The news hit me hard, but not in the way Linda might have expected. I felt a deep sadness, not for David, but for his child and the woman he had left behind. "That's terrible," I said softly. Linda nodded. "I thought you should know. Given your past with him." I appreciated her concern, but knew I had to set boundaries. "Thank you for telling me, Linda, but that part of my life is over. David made his choices, and they have nothing to do with me or my son." Linda looked at Jacob, then back at me. "I understand, Emma. I just thought—" I smiled, albeit a little sadly. "I appreciate it, Linda, but my focus is on Jacob and our life now." What David does or doesn't do isn't my concern anymore. She nodded, seemingly understanding. I hope you and Jacob are happy, Emma. You both deserve it. Thank you, we are. I glanced at Jacob, who was now fully engrossed in his toys again. And I intend to keep it that way. After Linda left, I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, taking deep breaths. The past had a way of sneaking up on you, but I was determined not to let it overshadow the life I had built for myself and my son. The park was vibrant that day, with laughter and the sounds of children playing. I was there with Jacob, my heart swelling with pride as I watched him run around. Then, a familiar, unwelcome voice sliced through the air. Emma, is that you? I turned, my heart sinking. Barbara, my former mother-in-law, was approaching, her eyes fixed on Jacob. Barbara? I said coolly. What are you doing here? Ignoring my tone, her gaze was locked on Jacob. He's grown so much. He's your son, right? Yes, this is Jacob, I answered, moving subtly to stand between her and my son. Barbara's eyes sparkled with a disturbing kind of eagerness. I was hoping to see him. After all, he's my grandson. I felt a wave of anger. And why would you want to see him? Well, you know, my other grandson. She trailed off, her face twisting. He's not... Well, he's sick. It's just not the same. I want to be part of a healthy grandchild's life. Her words struck me like a slap. The contempt in her voice for her own grandchild was appalling. Barbara, I said, my voice steely, you have no right to be part of Jacob's life. Not after everything that happened. But Emma, that was all David's doing, she protested. I shook my head. You supported him. You turned against me when I was carrying your grandchild. And now you speak with such disgust about your other grandson just because he's sick. That's unforgivable. Barbara's face reddened. You can't keep me away from my grandson. I can, and I will, I declared firmly. Jacob doesn't need someone in his life who values people based on their health. He will not be part of your twisted view of family. She looked like she was about to argue, but I cut her off. This conversation is over. Stay away from us, Barbara. Your presence is neither wanted nor welcomed. I took Jacob's hand and walked away, leaving Barbara standing alone, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. As we walked, Jacob looked up at me, his innocent eyes filled with questions. Mommy, who was that lady? That was someone we used to know, sweetheart, I replied gently, but she's not part of our lives anymore. Sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with warm colors, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Jacob was inside, his laughter echoing as he played. Life had settled into a calm rhythm, the storms of the past now distant memories. Mom, look what I made. Jacob's voice pulled me back from my thoughts. He came running out, holding a drawing in his hands. It was a picture of the two of us, smiling under a big, bright sun. It's beautiful, Jacob, I said, pulling him into a hug. You're quite the artist. He beamed with pride. I want to put it on the fridge. Let's do that, I smiled, following him inside. As we walked, I thought about how far we'd come. There was a time when the weight of the past felt crushing, but now it seemed like a distant echo. Later that evening, after Jacob was asleep, I sat down with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything. The phone rang, disrupting the quiet. I hesitated but decided to answer it. Hello? It was my sister Anna. Hey Emma, I just wanted to check in. How are you and Jacob doing? We're doing well, Anna. Jacob's growing up so fast, I replied, a smile in my voice. I heard about your run-in with Barbara. Are you okay? She asked, concern lacing her words. I sighed. Yeah, it was unexpected, but I'm okay. It's just a reminder of the past. I know it's tough, but you've come so far, Emma. You're strong, and you've built a wonderful life for you and Jacob, she said encouragingly. Her words warmed my heart. Thanks, Anna. It means a lot. We talked for a while longer, about small things, everyday life. It was comforting, this connection with my sister, a reminder of the support system I had. After hanging up, I went to the living room where Jacob's drawing was displayed on the fridge. Looking at it, I realized how much we had both grown. The pain and anger of the past had faded, leaving room for healing and new beginnings. I walked to Jacob's room, watching him sleep peacefully. Leaning down, I kissed his forehead gently. "Good night, my little artist," I whispered. Back on the porch, I gazed at the stars emerging in the night sky. The echoes of the past were fading, their hold on me loosening. In their place was hope, a quiet strength, and the unconditional love between a mother and her son.
My name is Helen Collins. I'm 29 years old and I work at the local library in a small town that most people have probably never heard of. My life is simple, maybe too simple for some, but it's mine. I've always been the quiet type, preferring the company of books to the loud outside world. The library is my sanctuary. It's a small, old building with creaky floors and shelves that have seen better days. But to me, it's perfect. Every day, I open the library doors at 8 a.m., turn on the lights, and breathe in the familiar scent of books. It's a routine that never gets old. My parents passed away when I was young, so I was raised by my grandmother. She was a kind woman, always encouraging me to read and learn. But she's gone now too, and I'm all alone. No siblings, no close relatives, just me and my small world. "Good morning, Helen." Mr. Jenkins, a regular visitor, greets me as he walks in. He's an elderly man who spends his days reading history books. "Good morning, Mr. Jenkins. The new shipment of history books arrived yesterday. I've set them aside for you," I reply with a smile. "Ah, you know me too well, dear," he chuckles, shuffling towards the designated shelf. The day goes on like this, with familiar faces coming and going. I help a group of kids find books for their school project, recommend a romance novel to Mrs. Harrison, and guide Mr. Thompson to the science fiction section. It's a quiet life, but I like it. I find comfort in the predictability, the routine. And then one day, everything changed. The day Jack walked into my life. He came in looking for a book, but I could tell he wasn't the regular library type. He seemed out of place with his crisp suit and confident stride. "Can you help me find a book?" he asked, his voice smooth and inviting. "Of course. What are you looking for?" I replied, trying to keep my composure. "It's a novel, The Great Gatsby, I believe." "Right this way," I said, leading him to the classic section. As I handed him the book, our hands brushed briefly, sending a jolt through me. It was a simple touch, but it lingered in my mind. "Thank you, Helen," he said, reading my name tag. "I'm Jack." "It's nice to meet you, Jack." That brief encounter marked the beginning of everything. The beginning of a love that I thought would last a lifetime. The beginning of a journey that would take me from the quiet life I knew into a world of chaos and betrayal. If only I had known then what I know now, maybe things would have been different. But life doesn't come with a warning label, and sometimes we just have to learn the hard way. After that first meeting, Jack began to visit the library more frequently. It was odd, considering he didn't strike me as the reading type. But every time he came in, he'd ask for a book recommendation and then spend a few minutes chatting with me. One day, he walked in just as I was struggling with a box of newly arrived books. "Need a hand with that?" he offered, walking over. "That would be great, thanks," I said, relieved. As we placed the books on the shelves, he asked, "So, Helen, what got you into working at a library?" I shrugged. "I've always loved books. They're like friends, you know. Plus, it's nice and quiet here." He laughed. "I can see that. It's like a whole different world." Our conversations grew longer with each visit. I found out that Jack worked in his family's business, something to do with real estate. He was easy to talk to, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was genuinely interested in me. Then one day, he surprised me. "Helen, would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" he asked, a hopeful look in his eyes. I was taken aback. "Like a date?" "Yes, like a date," he smiled. I hesitated. This was new territory for me, but there was something about him that made me want to say yes. "Okay, sure, I'd like that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We went to a small restaurant in town. It wasn't fancy, but it was cozy. We talked about everything and nothing, and for a few hours, I forgot about my usually solitary life. Walking home, Jack said, "I had a really great time tonight, Helen. You're very different from the people I usually meet." I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled. He continued, "I'd like to see you again. Would that be okay?" I nodded. Yes, I'd like that. From then on, we started seeing each other more regularly. He'd take me out to dinner or we'd go for walks. It was nice. For once, I felt like I was part of something more, part of a world that wasn't just about books and quietness. It wasn't long before I fell for him. Hard. He was charming and attentive, and he made me feel special. And when he proposed, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Looking back, I wish I had seen the signs. I wish I had known that the charm was just a mask, a cover for something much less pleasant. But love has a way of blinding you, of making you ignore the warning signs. And I was very much in love, or at least I thought I was. After Jack and I got engaged, things started to change. It began with his parents. They didn't approve of me from the start. They thought I was below their son because I didn't come from money. The first time I met them, it was clear they didn't like me. We were at their house for dinner, and I was nervous. It was a big, fancy house, nothing like what I was used to. "Helen, this is my mother, Margaret, and my father, Richard," Jack introduced. "Nice to meet you," I said, trying to smile. Margaret looked me up and down. So you're the girl who works at the library." "Yes, I am," I replied, feeling smaller by the second. Richard chimed in. "Jack, couldn't you find someone more suitable?" I felt like crawling into a hole. The dinner was long and uncomfortable. They made it clear they thought I wasn't good enough for their son. But Jack stood up for me, which made me love him even more. Before our wedding, they insisted on a prenuptial agreement. They said it was just a formality. I didn't have much to lose, so I agreed without making a fuss. Once we got married, I moved into Jack's house, which was actually his parents' house. They had given it to him as a wedding gift, but they acted like it was still theirs. His parents came over all the time, unannounced. They'd walk in and start ordering me around. "Helen, make us some coffee," Margaret would demand as soon as she walked in. And I would, without saying anything. I didn't want to cause trouble. One day, Margaret pointed at the TV and said, "Remember, Helen, in case of divorce, you can't claim this." It was like that with everything. They reminded me constantly that everything in the house wasn't mine. Jack started changing too. He wasn't the man I fell in love with. He started joining in on the jokes his parents made about me. One evening, I was trying to decide what to wear for a family event. I asked Jack for his opinion. "This one makes you look less drab," he said, laughing. I was hurt. It was like he was a different person around his parents. He didn't stand up for me anymore. Instead, he laughed along with them. It was exhausting, living in that house. I felt like an outsider, an unwanted guest. I kept hoping things would get better, but they only got worse. The stress got to me. I started having stomach pains, bad ones. I tried to ignore them, but one day I collapsed at the library. I woke up in the hospital. The doctor said it was stress-related. I was in the hospital for a few days. Jack didn't visit. He didn't even call. I felt so alone. Then, one day, a notary came to my room. He had news. My great-aunt, someone I barely remembered, had passed away, and she had left me her fortune, $30 million. I couldn't believe it. I didn't even know what to do with that kind of money, but suddenly, I wasn't just the poor girl from the library anymore. When Jack and his parents found out, they came to visit. Suddenly, they were all smiles and sweetness. "Darling, we're so happy for you," Margaret said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Yes, we're a family. We should support each other. Richard added. I didn't buy it. It was too much of a change. After they left, I overheard them talking outside my room. They didn't know I was listening. She's such a fool. Can you believe our luck? Jack laughed. We need to make sure she doesn't leave you, Jack. Maybe you should have a child with her. That will tie her down, Margaret suggested. I felt sick to my stomach. These people didn't care about me. They just wanted my money. I knew then what I had to do. I had to get out of that house, away from these people. I had to take control of my life. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I left the hospital with a plan in my mind. I knew what I had to do. As I got home, Jack and his parents were waiting. They were all smiles, acting like the caring family they never were. Oh, Helen, we were so worried about you, Margaret exclaimed. I nodded but didn't say much. I needed to act normal, not to tip them off. Jack came closer. So, when do you get the inheritance? He asked, a little too eagerly. I looked at him, the man I thought I loved, and realized I didn't even recognize him anymore. Soon, I said. But it's not something you need to worry about. His smile faltered a bit. But we're married, Helen. What's yours is mine, right? I forced a smile. Of course, darling. That night, I couldn't sleep. Their voices echoed in my head, their fake concern, their greed. It made me sick. I got up and started writing. I wrote down everything they had done, everything they had said. It was like a dam had broken, and years of pent-up frustration and pain poured out. The next morning, I had a meeting with a lawyer. I explained everything, showed him the prenuptial agreement. He was shocked but said the agreement would protect me. You're doing the right thing, he assured me. When I got back, I found Jack and his parents in the living room. They looked up as I walked in. There she is, our brave girl, Richard said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I sat down, clutching my purse. I have something to say. They all looked at me, curious. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice steady. The room went silent. Then Margaret erupted. What? You ungrateful little... Jack was on his feet. Helen, you can't be serious. We love you. Do you, Jack? Because I don't feel loved. I feel used. Margaret was fuming. We'll sue you. We'll take half of your inheritance. I reached into my purse and pulled out a copy of the prenuptial agreement. Actually, you can't. This says neither of us can claim the other's property in case of divorce. They were speechless. For the first time, I felt in control. I stood up. I'm leaving. I don't want any of you to contact me. I walked out of that house, their shouts and insults trailing behind me. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But as I drove away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was free from their disdain, their manipulation. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew it had to be better than the past. I rented a small apartment in the city. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. I was still dealing with the divorce, but I felt like I could handle it. One day, I got a call from the lawyer. Helen, there's something you should know about your great-aunt's will. I was puzzled. What about it? There's a condition. You need to use a portion of your inheritance for a charitable cause. It was your great-aunt's final wish. I was surprised. I had no idea. The lawyer continued. She was quite the philanthropist. It seems she wanted to pass that on to you. I hung up the phone, deep in thought. My great-aunt had given me a chance to do something good. It felt like a sign, a push in a new direction. I started researching charities and causes. I wanted to do something meaningful, something that would make a difference. That's when I stumbled upon a small organization that helped women who were victims of domestic abuse. It struck a chord with me. I contacted them and set up a meeting. The woman I met, Linda, was passionate and dedicated. We provide shelter, legal aid, and counseling to women who have nowhere else to go, Linda explained. I listened, moved by the stories she shared. I want to help, I said. feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. With Linda's guidance, I used a part of the inheritance to fund a new shelter. It was an incredible feeling, knowing I was helping other women find a way out, just like I had. A few weeks later, Linda invited me to the opening of the shelter. It was a small event, but the atmosphere was full of hope and gratitude. As people mingled, I noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was Sarah, an old colleague from the library. "Helen, is that you?" she asked, surprised. "Sarah, it's been so long," I said, hugging her. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I told her about the shelter, about my involvement. She listened, her eyes wide. "That's incredible, Helen. I had no idea." "It's a new chapter for me," I said, smiling. We spent the evening catching up. It felt good to reconnect with an old friend. It felt like pieces of my life were slowly falling back into place. As the event wrapped up, Linda came over. "Helen, I can't thank you enough. This shelter will change lives." I looked around at the faces of the women who now had a safe place to go. "It's the least I could do," I said, feeling a warmth in my heart that I hadn't felt in a very long time. The days started to blend into one another, each filled with the rewarding work at the shelter. I was finding a new sense of purpose, something that was truly mine. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in a while, Jack's. My heart raced with a mixture of emotions, but curiosity won. "Hello, Jack," I said, my voice calm. "Helen, I need to talk to you. Can we meet? It's urgent." His voice sounded desperate. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet him at a public coffee shop, hoping that being in a familiar place would give me strength. Sitting across from Jack, he looked different, defeated, almost pitiful. His eyes were pleading. "Helen, I made a huge mistake. I want you back. I've realized how much you mean to me," he blurted out. I looked at him, feeling nothing but contempt. "Why now, Jack?" He sighed. "My parents, they controlled everything. They were the reason our marriage failed. I was weak, but I'm different now." I felt a surge of anger. "You blame your parents? You stood by while they treated me like dirt. You laughed with them, Jack." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please, Helen, I know I was wrong. I've changed." I stared at him, seeing the man I once loved but now felt nothing for. "Changed or not, it's too late. I feel nothing for you, Jack. Nothing but contempt." His face fell, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I married. But it was fleeting. "I'm sorry, Jack. I've moved on. I have a life now, a purpose. There's no place for you in it," I said firmly. He nodded slowly, a look of resignation on his face. "I understand. I just had to try." Leaving the coffee shop, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. Truly over. The next day, there was an event at the shelter. A local artist had donated a sculpture, and it was to be unveiled in the garden. As I stood there, surrounded by people who supported and believed in me, I felt a sense of belonging. Sarah, my old colleague from the library, stood beside me. "You've done something amazing here, Helen," she said, smiling. The artist pulled the cover off the sculpture, revealing a figure of a woman reaching up to the sky. It symbolized hope, strength, and new beginnings. Applause filled the air, and for a moment, everything felt right in the world. Linda, the woman who had helped me so much, came over. "Helen, this is just the beginning. There's so much more we can do." I looked around at the faces filled with hope and knew she was right. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it fully. My new life was busy and fulfilling. Every day at the shelter brought new challenges and rewards. My confidence grew, and for the first time in years, I felt in control of my destiny. I even started taking self-defense classes, something I would have never imagined doing before. One day, as I was leaving the shelter, I saw a car parked outside. It was my mother-in-law, Margaret. and she stepped out as soon as she saw me. "Helen, we need to talk," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. "I have nothing to say to you, Margaret," I replied, my voice steady. "Please, just hear me out. I've realized how wrong we were," she pleaded. I stopped and looked at her. She seemed genuine, but I couldn't forget the past. "What do you want, Margaret?" "I want to apologize. I treated you terribly. I've lost my son because of it, and I don't want to lose you, too. You were like the daughter I never had," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. I felt a pang of something, sympathy, perhaps, but I pushed it away. "Margaret, you made my life a living hell. An apology won't change that. I've moved on, and I suggest you do the same," I said firmly. She reached out to me, but I stepped back. "Please, Helen, I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make things right." I shook my head. "It's too late for that. Goodbye, Margaret." As I walked away, I felt her gaze on my back, but I didn't look back. I had learned to stand up for myself, and there was no going back to the way things were. The next day, I received a letter from Jack's lawyer. He was contesting the divorce settlement. I wasn't surprised, but I was ready. I met with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Rachel. "He's got no leg to stand on, Helen. The prenuptial agreement is clear. He's just trying to intimidate you," she said confidently. I nodded. "I'm not afraid of him anymore. Let's fight this." The court date arrived, and I walked in with my head held high. Jack was there with his lawyer, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was a flash of the old Jack, the one I had loved, but it vanished quickly. The judge listened to both sides and then made her decision. The prenuptial agreement stood, and Jack's claims were dismissed. I felt a surge of relief and triumph. After the court session, Jack approached me. "Helen, I'm sorry. I was wrong," he said, his voice low. I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved, but now felt nothing for. "Goodbye, Jack. Take care of yourself," I said, and walked away. As I left the courtroom, I felt a sense of closure. That chapter of my life was finally over, and a new one was just beginning. At the shelter, we were planning a fundraiser, and it was taking all my attention. The support from the community was overwhelming, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The night of the fundraiser arrived, and the place was buzzing with energy. People from all walks of life had come to support our cause. As I looked around, I realized how far I had come. From a quiet, timid woman to someone who stood up for herself and others. "Helen, you did it. This is amazing," Sarah said, coming up to me. I smiled. We did it. And there's so much more to do. As the event went on, I felt a sense of accomplishment and purpose. This was my life now, and I was exactly where I was meant to be.
Hello there. I'm Rosie, a 30-year-old who works as a manager at a local company. I live with my husband, Jake, in a house that I own. It's nothing fancy, just a cozy place we call home. I guess you could say I'm a pretty modest person, not one to make a fuss. I have a lot of patience, which has always been a strength of mine, or so I thought. Jake and I get along really well. He's a great guy, supportive and kind. We've been married for a few years now, and it's been mostly smooth sailing. Well, except for one little, actually, not so little issue. His parents, Robert and Susan. Now don't get me wrong. I understand the importance of family. But Jake's parents, they're a whole different story. They're very direct people, the type who say whatever is on their mind without thinking about how it might affect others. They don't really understand or respect personal space. It all started pretty harmlessly. Robert and Susan would drop by unannounced for breakfast or dinner. I didn't mind initially. After all, they were family. But it quickly turned into a regular thing. They'd come over whenever they felt like it. And because they had a key to our house, they would just walk in, even when we were not expecting them. One day, I was in the bathroom getting ready for work, and suddenly, I heard someone in the house. I peeked out and saw Susan in the kitchen. "Morning, Rosie. Thought I'd surprise you with breakfast," she said cheerfully. I remember forcing a smile and thinking, this is getting a bit much. Jake, bless his heart, tried to talk to them about it. Mom, Dad, Rosie and I love having you over, but we also need our own space, he said one evening. But it didn't go well. Susan's eyes welled up with tears, and Robert's face turned red. Are you saying you don't want us in your life? Susan cried. After all we've done for you! Jake was caught off guard. No, that's not what I meant. And just like that, the conversation ended. They played the victim card so well, Jake didn't stand a chance. I felt for him. He was torn between his parents and our life together. Things escalated from there. It wasn't just meals anymore. They started staying overnight in our guest room, and before we knew it, they were spending days at our place. It felt like we had permanent house guests. I tried talking to Jake again. Honey, I love your parents, but this is getting out of hand. They're here all the time, I said, hoping he'd understand. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, Rosie. I'll try talking to them again. But deep down, I knew it was a lost cause. They had this way of making him feel guilty, and he just couldn't stand up to them. It was a tough spot, and I felt stuck. I loved Jake, but his parents were just too much. Life with Jake's parents dropping in whenever they pleased started to feel like a TV show where the same episode kept replaying. Breakfast turned into lunches, which turned into dinners, and before I knew it, our guest room seemed more theirs than ours. I tried to be understanding, but it was getting harder each day. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of pots and pans clanging in the kitchen. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the clock. It was barely 6:30 a.m. I wandered into the kitchen, still half asleep, and there was Susan, cheerfully making pancakes. Good morning, Rosie. I thought we'd have a big family breakfast today, she said, not noticing the surprise on my face. I managed a polite smile. Good morning, Susan. That's nice of you. I sat at the table, sipping my coffee, watching her move around our kitchen like she owned the place. Robert soon joined us, a newspaper under his arm. Morning, Rosie. Sleep well? He asked, not waiting for an answer as he got busy with the sports section. I nodded, still trying to wake up. Jake stumbled in a few minutes later, looking as surprised as I felt. Mom? Dad, what are you doing here so early? He asked, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. We wanted to surprise you with breakfast, Susan said, flipping a pancake with a flourish. Jake gave me an apologetic look, which I returned with a resigned shrug. After that day, their visits became more frequent. They started leaving personal items in the guest room, which soon looked like their second bedroom. I tried to talk to Jake about it, but he was in a tough spot. I know it's a lot, Rosie, but they're my parents. What can I do? He'd say, looking genuinely torn. I nodded, trying to be understanding. I get it, Jake, but we need our own space too. One evening, I found Susan rearranging our living room. I thought this would look better over here, she said, pushing the couch to the other side of the room. I couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. Susan, I appreciate your help, but I liked it the way it was. She looked at me, surprised. Oh, I just thought it needed a change. But okay, I'll put it back. I watched as she reluctantly moved the couch back, feeling a bit guilty for snapping at her. Things came to a head one night when I came home from work, exhausted, only to find a small gathering in our living room. Robert and Susan had invited some friends over without telling us. Rosie, dear, we thought we'd have a little get-together. Hope you don't mind, Susan said, handing me a glass of wine. I looked around at the unfamiliar faces in my living room and felt my patience wearing thin. Actually, Susan, I do mind. Jake and I had plans tonight. The room went silent, and Susan's face fell. Oh, I didn't realize. We'll wrap this up then. Jake came to my rescue. Yeah, Mom, we had a quiet evening planned. Maybe check with us next time? They ended the gathering shortly after, but the damage was done. I felt like a stranger in my own home, and it was clear something had to change. I tried talking to Jake again. This can't go on, Jake. We need to set some boundaries with your parents. He nodded, looking more determined this time. You're right, Rosie. I'll talk to them. This is our home, and we should feel comfortable in it. The breaking point came when Jake and I planned a short holiday. We needed a break, a chance to recharge and get away from everything, including the constant presence of his parents in our house. I was really looking forward to it. "We'll be gone for a week, just the two of us. It'll be nice," I said to Jake as we packed our bags. He smiled, wrapping his arm around me. "I can't wait. We need this, Rosie." We informed Robert and Susan about our trip, expecting them to understand. "We're going away for a week. Just wanted to let you guys know," Jake told them over dinner. Susan looked surprised. "A whole week? What about the house? Who will look after it?" I exchanged a glance with Jake. "The house will be fine, Susan. It's just a week." We left for our holiday, and for the first few days, it was bliss. No unexpected visitors, no rearranged furniture, just peace. But our peace was short-lived. On the third day, we received a call from Jake's work. There was an emergency, and they needed him back. Our relaxing getaway was cut short. We were both disappointed, but understood that these things happen. We arrived home 2 days earlier than planned, expecting to walk into an empty house. But what we found was far from it. The moment we opened the door, we were greeted by the sound of laughter and music. There were people in our living room, people we didn't know. "What the?" Jake muttered, looking as confused as I felt. We walked in further, and that's when we saw them. Robert and Susan, in the midst of a group of strangers, having what looked like a party. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" Jake asked, his voice a mix of surprise and anger. Susan looked up, her smile fading when she saw us. "Jake, Rosie, you're back early." "Who are these people?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Robert cleared his throat. "Well, we thought since you were away, we'd rent the place out to some friends, just for a few days." I felt my jaw drop. "You did what?" Jake looked like he was about to explode. "You rented out our house? Without even asking us?" Susan wrung her hands. "We thought it would be fine. You were away, and these friends needed a place to stay." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They had turned our home into a rental property without our permission. The nerve of it all left me speechless. Jake was fuming. "Everyone out. Now," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The strangers gathered their things, murmuring apologies as they left. Robert and Susan stood there, looking guilty but also defiant. "We didn't think it would be a problem," Robert said, trying to justify their actions. "A problem? You crossed a line. This is our home, not a hotel," Jake said, his voice shaking with anger. I stood there, watching the scene unfold, feeling a mix of anger, disbelief, and disappointment. This was it. This was the moment when I realized things couldn't go on like this. Something had to change, and it had to change now. After the house was cleared, Jake and I sat down with his parents. "This can't happen again. You can't just use our house like this," Jake said, trying to remain calm. Susan started crying. "We didn't mean any harm. We just thought—" "No, Mom. There's no excuse for this," Jake interrupted. "We need our privacy. We need you to respect our home." They apologized, promising it would never happen again. But their apologies felt empty, and their promises even more so. I looked at Jake, and I could tell he felt the same way. Exhausted and at my wits' end, I knew we had to do something. The love I felt for Jake propelled me to find a middle ground, a solution that wouldn't tear our family apart. The constant invasions by his parents were suffocating, and it was time to reclaim our space. "We need a break, Jake, and we need to do something about your parents," I said, the determination clear in my voice. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Jake nodded. "You're right. Let's plan a weekend getaway. But first, let's change the locks. They can't keep walking in like they own the place." So, before our much-needed escape, we executed our secret mission. Replacing the locks felt liberating, like we were finally setting boundaries that should have been there all along. With the new locks in place, we packed our bags. Before leaving, I suggested, "Let's turn off our phones. No distractions, no calls, just us." Jake agreed without a second thought, and we left for our weekend retreat, phones off, hoping for a few days of peace. Our weekend was a slice of heaven. We laughed, shared stories, and for a while, the chaos of our life seemed a distant memory. But as we prepared to head back, a nagging sense of uncertainty crept in. On our drive home, we finally turned our phones back on. Almost immediately, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I answered hesitantly. "This is Officer Daniels. Am I speaking with Mrs. Rosie Thompson?" A stern voice inquired. "Yes, this is she," I replied, my heart starting to race. "I'm calling about an incident at your residence. We have detained several individuals who broke the locks and entered your home." My mouth went dry. "Broke the locks? Entered our home?" "Yes, ma'am. It appears they were trying to gain unauthorized access. We have them at the station." I glanced at Jake, who was listening intently, his expression a mix of shock and confusion. "We'll be home soon, officer. Thank you for letting us know," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. Hanging up, I relayed the information to Jake. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, and he let out a long, deep breath. "Who would do that? And why?" I whispered, a sense of dread washing over me. "We'll find out soon enough," Jake replied, his jaw set firmly. As Jake and I drove home, the weight of uncertainty was heavy in the car. We both knew that whatever awaited us at home was bound to be unpleasant. The thought of strangers breaking into our home was unsettling, but deep down, I had a nagging suspicion about who might be involved. "We should have seen this coming," Jake said, breaking the silence. "Changing the locks was bound to set them off." I nodded, knowing he was referring to his parents. "Let's just deal with it and move forward. We can't let this ruin what we've built." Arriving home, we found a police car parked outside. My heart sank. This was real. Officer Daniels, a tall man with a stern face, greeted us. "We caught them trying to break in. They were quite adamant about getting inside," he explained. "Who were they?" Jake asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "It was your parents, Mr. Thompson, and some of their friends," Officer Daniels replied. Jake's face turned pale. "My parents? But why would they—" "It seems they were unaware of the lock change. When they couldn't get in, they tried to force their way," the officer continued. I could see Jake struggling to process the information. His parents had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. "Can we see them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They're still at the station. You can talk to them there if you wish." Jake and I exchanged a look, a silent agreement passing between us. We needed to face this head-on. At the station, we found Robert and Susan sitting in a small room, looking both angry and embarrassed. Their friends were there too, looking equally uncomfortable. "Mom, Dad, what were you thinking?" Jake asked, his disappointment evident. Robert stood up, his expression defiant. "We came to check on the house. We always have a key. Why did you change the locks without telling us?" "It's our house, Dad. You can't just come and go as you please. We've talked about this," Jake replied, trying to keep his calm. Susan started to cry. "We just wanted to be close to you. We never thought you'd lock us out." "It's not about locking you out. It's about respect and privacy. You can't break into our house because you feel entitled to it," I said, finding my voice. Their friends looked on, awkward and silent, clearly regretting being part of this mess. "We're sorry, but we didn't know what else to do," one of them mumbled. Officer Daniels stepped in. "We understand it's a family matter, but breaking and entering is a serious offense. We need assurances this won't happen again." Jake looked at his parents, a mix of sadness and resolve in his eyes. "This can't happen again, Mom and Dad. You need to understand boundaries." Robert and Susan nodded, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. We left the station with heavy hearts. The drive back home was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. The events of the day had taken a toll, and as we walked back into our home, we knew things would never be the same again. The days following the incident were like walking through a thick fog. Jake and I were trying to make sense of everything while dealing with the aftermath. We had to have several uncomfortable conversations with neighbors, explaining what had happened. It was embarrassing and draining. One evening, as we were sitting in the living room, Jake let out a long sigh. "I never thought my parents would go this far," he said, shaking his head. I reached out and held his hand. "It's hard, I know. but we'll get through this together." He squeezed my hand in response, and we sat there in silence, each lost in our thoughts. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence. I got up to answer it, finding our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, standing there with a concerned look. "Rosie, dear, is everything all right? We saw the police the other day," she said, her voice full of worry. "Yes, Mrs. Henderson. It was a family issue, but it's under control now. Thank you for checking in," I replied, offering her a small smile. She nodded, still looking uncertain. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me." After she left, Jake looked at me. "Maybe we should have a small get-together. Invite the neighbors, clear the air. What do you think?" I thought about it for a moment. "That's a good idea. Let's do it this weekend." The preparations kept us busy, and for a brief time, it felt good to focus on something positive. We invited a few neighbors, keeping it small and casual. The day of the get-together arrived, and our guests slowly trickled in. The atmosphere was light, and the conversation flowed. It was a much-needed distraction. During the evening, Mrs. Henderson approached me. "You two are such a lovely couple. It's a shame about the trouble with your in-laws." I gave her a reassuring smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. We're handling it the best we can." As the evening wound down, Jake and I felt a sense of relief. The event had served its purpose, easing the tension in the neighborhood. The past few weeks had been a roller coaster, but Jake and I knew what needed to be done. Setting boundaries was the only way forward. We sat at the kitchen table, carefully drafting the rules we felt were necessary for our sanity and the health of our relationship. "We can't just go on like this, Jake. It's time for a change," I said firmly, pen in hand. He nodded, looking somber. "I know. It's just going to be tough." Once we were ready, we invited Jake's parents over to discuss the new rules. The atmosphere was tense as they sat down in our living room. Jake cleared his throat, and I could see his hands were trembling slightly. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk about some changes we're making," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. His parents looked at us, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. "We've decided to set some boundaries regarding your visits to our house," I continued, trying to sound as calm and composed as possible. Robert, Jake's father, raised an eyebrow. "What kind of boundaries?" Jake took a deep breath. "First, we need you to call and ask before coming over. No more unexpected visits. And we can't give you the keys back. It's important for us to have our own space," I added, trying to sound as gentle as possible. Susan, Jake's mother, immediately looked upset. "But we're family. Why are you doing this to us?" "It's about respect and privacy, Susan," I replied. "We love you, but we need these boundaries for the sake of our relationship." Their reaction was immediate and emotional. Susan started crying, and John's face turned red with anger. "This is outrageous! We're your parents! How could you treat us like strangers?" Robert exclaimed, his voice raising. "We're not trying to hurt you," Jake said, his voice strained. "We just need some rules." Susan sobbed. "We refuse to accept these rules. It's like you don't want us in your lives anymore." The conversation spiraled from there. No matter how much we tried to explain, they wouldn't listen. They categorically refused to comply with the rules and kept crying, playing the victims. Seeing no way to reach an understanding, Jake and I exchanged a resigned look. "Maybe it's best if we take a break from each other for a while," Jake finally said, his voice heavy with sadness. I nodded in agreement, though my heart ached at the thought. Jake's parents left our house in tears, and we were left in a deafening silence. It was one of the hardest decisions we had ever made, but we knew it was necessary. We needed space, and they needed time to understand and respect our boundaries. In the quiet of our home, Jake wrapped his arm around me. "I'm sorry it had to come to this." I leaned into his embrace. "It's okay. We had to stand up for ourselves. Maybe with time, they'll understand." As we sat there, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt and sadness. But deep down, I knew we had made the right choice. Setting boundaries was essential, even if it meant stepping back from family for a while. We are not in contact with Robert and Susan at the moment. Perhaps you will condemn us for this, but we decided to wait until they themselves understand the wrongness of their actions.